What if I told you that one of the oldest faiths in the world, it didn't actually start with a god at all, but with something as simple as watching a sunrise? Well, get ready, because we are about to go on an absolutely incredible 5,000-year journey to understand Sanatan Dharma. It's a story of how a philosophy based on the laws of nature grew into a massive global religion.
So that brings us to the big question, right? Is Sanatan Dharma, the ancient, eternal law, the same thing as modern Hinduism? Well, the short answer? Nope, not exactly. The faith we see today is actually the result of a long, fascinating transformation. And that's exactly the story we're going to unpack right now.
And this is where things get really interesting. Just look at the shift. We go from worshiping the raw forces of nature to building these magnificent, intricate temples. From thinking about abstract, eternal laws to telling these vibrant stories of deities that we all know today. And maybe the biggest surprise of all, from a faith with literally no idols or temples to one where idol worship is a central practice. So how on earth did that happen?
Okay, to really get this, we have to go way back. We're talking traveling back in time to the banks of the Indus River, over 4,000 years ago, to figure out what this eternal law was all about in the first place.
The first clue is right there in the name. In Sanskrit, Sanatan means eternal, something that has no beginning and no end. So you see, it wasn't a religion like we think of one today. It was more like a description of reality itself, an eternal, unchanging truth.
Just try to picture this for a second. Imagine a world without these huge temples we see everywhere. No idols, and not even the concept of a single all-powerful God. It's a totally different mindset, right? Instead, people just lived in this really deep, intimate connection with the natural world all around them.
Their first dharma, their first real duty or law, was just observation. Super simple. They saw the sun rise and set every single day, like clockwork. They knew that the rain made their crops grow, that fire gave them warmth and cooked their food. These weren't miracles to them. They were the Sanatan, the unchangeable, eternal laws of the universe. That was the original truth.
So, how did we get from these simple observations to a whole complex system of beliefs? Well, that brings us to our next chapter, the age of codification. This is when those natural laws started getting written down, rituals were born, and society began to get a lot more structured.
The whole process was completely organic. You had these wise sages, or rishis, who would just observe the universe and then pass that wisdom down person to person through oral tradition. It was called shruti, which literally means heard knowledge. Over time, all this knowledge was finally gathered and written down in the texts we now call the Vedas. And here's a really key point. The Vedas didn't talk about gods in the way we do. They talked about devatas, the divine forces of nature. So Agni was the personification of fire, and Indra was the force of the sky and rain.
Now, during this same Vedic period, a social structure also started to pop up. It was first mentioned in the Rig Veda, and it was called the Varna system. And it was originally designed to organize society based on a person's work, their duties, basically their karma.
And this right here is a huge turning point, one that has echoed down through centuries of Indian society. See, the original Varna system, it was all about your actions, your profession, your karma. It was meant to be fluid, But over time, something changed. It hardened into this really rigid hierarchy based not on what you did, but on who you were born to, your janma. And that shift, well, it had massive and deeply felt consequences.
So, all of this brings us to a major turning point in our story. Those abstract ideas and super complex rituals from the Vedic period, well, they were becoming way too complicated for the average person. So for the faith to keep going, it had to change. It had to evolve. Think about it. By around 1200 BCE, the fire rituals, the yajnas, had gotten so elaborate and so expensive that really only the rich and powerful could afford to do them. And that created this huge spiritual gap, leaving most people feeling totally disconnected from the main religious practices of their own culture.
But that gap, it actually sparked a new wave of thinking, a whole new kind of religious innovation. And you can see it perfectly if you just trace the evolution of the sacred texts. We go from the ritual-heavy hymns of the Vedas, to the deep philosophical questions of the Upanishads, and finally to the exciting story-driven Puranas and the great epics, the Ramayana and Mahabharata.
So the Upanishads, they introduced this absolutely revolutionary idea, Brahman. Now this wasn't a god with a face. It was this single,
formless, cosmic energy that just flows through everything and creates the entire universe. I mean, it was a mind-blowing philosophical leap for sure. But for the average person, it was still super abstract and pretty hard to connect with on a personal level.
And this is where the genius of the Puranas comes in. They took that incredibly abstract idea of Brahman and gave it three main, relatable forms: Brahma, the creator; Vishnu, the preserver; and Shiva, the destroyer and transformer. And just like that, the formless cosmic energy had a face, a story, a personality that people could finally connect with, pray to, and feel close to.
So this big shift towards personal gods really set the stage for everything that came next. It led to the institutionalization of the faith, and it's how it eventually got the name we all use today: Hinduism. Okay, so where did the word Hindu even come from? This might actually surprise you. It wasn't a religious term at all to begin with. It was just a geographical label. It was a name the Persians used for the people who lived across the Sindhu, or Indus River. In their language, Sindhu became Hindu, and the name just kind of stuck. For centuries, it was just a way of saying people from that region.
The faith really started to look like its modern self during the Gupta Empire, about 1700 years ago. The Gupta kings became huge patrons of these new Puranic traditions. They funded the construction of the first big, magnificent stone temples. And this is what really institutionalized idol and temple worship, cementing this new form of the faith as the major spiritual force in India.
But wait, the story's not over yet. If we fast forward to the 15th century, we see another massive spiritual revolution that would once again change everything.
This was the Bhakti movement, and it was truly a revolution of the heart. You had these poet saints, like Kabir and Mirabai, traveling all over, singing this radical new message. They said what really mattered wasn't the complex rituals or where you came from. It was personal love and devotion, bhakti. It was this incredibly powerful message of spiritual equality that just threw the doors of faith wide open to absolutely everyone, no matter what their caste was.
Wow. So, after this incredible journey, after thousands of years of these huge changes, what's left? What's the one thing that connects all these different versions of the faith? What's the constant thread?
I mean, we've seen the outward forms of worship change so dramatically. It started with just a reverence for nature, then it moved to these complex fire rituals, then to idol worship in temples, and finally to this deeply personal, internal kind of devotion. The how of worship has been changing constantly.
And that brings us right back to our original question. But now it feels so much deeper, doesn't it? After this whole 5,000-year adventure, what is the one eternal, unchanging truth, the Sanatan Dharma, that has actually survived through all of it? And maybe, just maybe, the ultimate answer is this. The forms change, the names evolve, but the core idea has always been a search for truth. And the one thing that has endured, the real teaching of Sanatan Dharma, is that this search isn't an outward journey to some temple or some god, but an inward journey to understand the self. That right there is the eternal quest